Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material and distill those crucial, transformative insights so you can get anchored in a topic right away. Today, we are wrestling with one of the most counterintuitive principles in leadership and really in life. It's this paradox of yielding control just when the pressure is at its highest, when everything around you is turbulent, a boardroom crisis, a market disruption, or just immense expectations. The natural instinct, the human thing to do, is to tighten your grip.
To white-knuckle the steering wheel.
Exactly. You try to micromanage every single variable because you believe that force is going to equal safety.
But the sources you shared with us, they show that this desperate impulse to clamp down is exactly what exhausts us. It compromises our judgment and, ultimately causes us to fail. The key to thriving under pressure is learning how to surrender strategically. And that is the complete opposite of losing your authority.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're getting into surrendered leadership. And let's just, address the elephant in the room right away. To most of the world, that word surrender, it means defeat. It means giving up, waving the white flag.
And we have to just discard that image entirely. Surrendered leadership isn't avoidance. It's not passivity. It's certainly not weakness. It's actually a profound demonstration of strength. We define it as a dynamic posture, a strategic alignment that adapts under severe pressure. It's about showing strength by releasing the illusion of control while you maintain your integrity and absolute clarity of direction.
So you're letting go of the need to manage the external outcomes.
That's right. So you can focus entirely on managing your own internal state, your own obedience to your core mission.
Okay, so we're moving from a reactive, frantic kind of control, which is exhausting, to something proactive and confident, to a surrender that's anchoring. So for this deep dive, we'll explore some biblical and contemporary blueprints. We'll analyze the surprisingly compassionate root causes of why we grasp for control. And then critically, we'll get into some actionable tools.
Right. Things like the surrender stress map and the surrender spectrum. So you can put this into practice immediately.
Okay, let's really nail down that distinction you mentioned. Weakness versus strength. Because the big pitfall here seems to be avoidance. If surrender means confronting reality and yielding the outcome, what does avoidance actually look like in, say, a high-stakes professional environment?
Avoidance is, well, it's just retreating. It's choosing self-protection, choosing comfort. In a leadership role, avoidance might look like delegating a conflict because you don't want to feel that discomfort.
Or delaying a necessary ethical audit.
Exactly. Or just constantly hitting the snooze button on that really difficult, necessary conversation. It numbs the discomfort, and it runs from responsibility.
So then, what does true surrender look like in that same situation?
Surrender is active. It's intentional. And it's courageous. It steps into responsibility, confronting reality with, radical honesty.
Yeah.
And crucially, when we say obedience in a leadership context, we really mean alignment. Alignment with your highest values and your mission.
So where avoidance hides?
Surrender humbles. If avoidance glosses over bad quarterly numbers, surrender acknowledges the truth of the situation so that decisive, necessary action can actually follow. Where avoidance weakens the whole organization, surrender stabilizes the leader's heart.
That makes the urgency so clear. I mean, the complexity of modern leadership market volatility, team conflicts, just the endless flow of information, it demands massive resilience.
It does. And if a leader tries to cling to this illusion of total control over all of those things, they just risk burnout. They risk making these reactive, compromised decisions.
So mastering strategic surrender paradoxically gives you more clarity and more influence, especially when things are most chaotic.
And to really internalize this dynamic posture, we need models. The sources give us these incredible lessons from ancient leaders who navigated chaos, not by tightening their grip, but by yielding. Let's start with Joseph.
His career path was definitely unconventional.
That's one way to put it.
I mean, slavery, false accusation, prison. And then he becomes the second most powerful person in Egypt. It's a roadmap built on suffering, not, networking.
It is a masterclass in surrender as formation. You read Genesis 41, and you realize his leadership was forged in these unseen places.
The pits and the prison cells.
Exactly. Long before he ever held a staff of authority, he surrendered control over his destiny, his timeline, his reputation.
Okay, walk us through that. The reputation surrender. When Potiphar's wife falsely accuses him, he gets thrown into prison. He loses his freedom, his good name. How did surrender show up there?
Well, his surrender manifested as diligence and integrity. He didn't waste time trying to you know, control the narrative or manipulate his situation from his cell. Instead, his yieldedness became diligence in Potiphar's house and then resilience in the prison. He just served faithfully, excellently, right where he was planted.
So the core insight there is that before a higher power trusts a leader with massive external influence, he shapes their internal world.
That's it. Joseph's secret wasn't his brilliance in reading dreams. It was his commitment to integrity, no matter what his circumstances were.
So if Joseph models surrender as this internal formation, Paul models it as strength through active dependence right in the middle of operational chaos.
Yeah.
Paul's life was just pure conflict and crisis.
That's absolutely right. Paul is the model of surrendered resolve. And you can see a surrender taking form in two really distinct ways. First, there's the conflict and injustice in that Philippian jail. He and Silas are beaten and chained for doing what they believed was right. And what do?
They sing hymns.
They sing hymns.
Which seems so counterintuitive to a modern leader. We'd be focused on legal action, on damage control, on just surviving.
But surrender became worship in injustice. They anchored their identity in their calling, not their circumstances. It's like a modern leader facing an unfair public character assassination and choosing to maintain their inner peace and mission alignment instead of
jumping into a reactive, retaliatory social media war.
Yes, they yielded the right to control their own narrative.
But then during the actual physical crisis, the shipwreck in Acts 27, Paul doesn't just sing, he takes charge.
Correct. His surrender did not mean passivity. It meant perfect clarity. His dependence on God resulted in decisive action and command. He stood up, told everyone, "Take heart," and commanded the sailors to stay together. He essentially saved everyone on board through practical, strategic leadership. His authority came from the consecration, not his position.
And finally, the ultimate paradox the sources point to: Jesus washing the disciples' feet. He acted because he knew his authority, showing that ultimate power expresses itself through surrendered humility, not self-protective power. Okay, that summarizes the ancient blueprints beautifully. They all point toward this internal stability that leads to external clarity. But if that's the ideal, let's pivot to our modern psychological reality. Why do we grasp so tightly when pressure rises?
This is where we need to, slow down and shift our perspective a bit.
Yeah.
Control is rarely born in conscious arrogance or malice. It's most often born in pain and fear. If we just diagnose a micromanaging boss as a power-hungry tyrant, we miss the root cause completely.
So it's a defensive mechanism, an internal shield.
Absolutely. The oldest story is Adam and Eve reaching for knowledge, that constant temptation toward autonomy. We try to anchor ourselves without anchoring in God, believing, if I don't manage this, everything will fall apart and I will be hurt or I will fail.
We confuse our competence with our necessity.
Perfectly said.
So if control is really driven by pain and fear, does that mean our strategy for dealing with micromanagement, both in ourselves and in others, needs to shift entirely?
Yes.
It suddenly sounds like it requires compassion, not just disciplinary action.
It does. Let's look at that analogy from the source material about the pastor named Samuel. He grew up with scarcity, instability, a childhood where the world just felt unpredictable and unsafe. And later, as a leader of a large organization, he translated that old trauma into hypervigilance. He micromanaged every budget item, every presentation slide, every minute of every meeting. He spiritualized his anxiety by calling his control excellence.
But underneath that mask of excellence, what the sources are showing us is a frightened person trying to secure a world that felt unsafe 30 years ago.
That is the profound revelation. High-stress moments don't require more control, they require deeper trust. The primary driver is fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being exposed. Surrender is the active discipline of letting go of self-reliance.
Okay, this is where we get fully practical for you, the learner. If control is our default, and we recognize the root is fear, how do we intentionally choose surrender in a high-stakes moment? The sources offer a framework for this, a proactive response called the Surrender Stress Map.
This tool is so critical because it forces you to stop and script a better response before the trigger happens. It's an act of deep internal discipline. You're systematically replacing impulsive, fear-driven commands with calm, centered discernment.
So this isn't just about listing your feelings. It's about establishing new neural pathways for how you respond. So can you walk us through the 5 critical components of this map?
Right. You structure it with 5 columns, and they're designed to move you from analysis to action. First, you have the trigger, the specific situation that provokes your stress.
Okay, like a critical email from a board member or a sudden downturn in quarterly profits.
Perfect. Second column, thought pattern. This is your internal anxious script that immediately fires up. This means I'm a failure, or I have to fix this right now before anyone finds out.
Got it. Then the third is your default reaction.
Your habitual, unhelpful response.
Hmm.
Maybe that's aggressive defense or withdrawal or sending a reactive late-night email, micromanaging the team.
And the fourth column is where the shift happens, the surrendered response.
Yes, your alternative, intentional, principled action. So you pause, you pray, you consult a trusted mentor, you actively listen to the criticism before you even think about responding.
And the final one.
The scripture or prayer anchor. Just a verse or a short prayer to recenter your focus on truth and stability.
Let's run through a quick example. Say the trigger is a key staff member just quit without notice right in the middle of a project launch.
Okay. Your default thought pattern is probably, I'm totally exposed, I can't trust anyone, I have to do all this work myself now. And the default reaction is to send out a frantic, panicked email to the remaining staff.
Which creates a culture of fear.
Right. But the surrendered response, using the map, would be to pause, bless the person who left, and then gather the remaining team calmly. Acknowledge the unexpected burden without bitterness, and strategically delegate based on trust, not panic.
And the anchor might be something like, my sufficiency is not in my staff, but in God's provision.
Exactly. The map is discipline. Surrender isn't a feeling, it's a choice of action.
That makes it incredibly tangible.
Yeah.
And this connects to another idea, that surrender isn't just one passive stance, it's a whole spectrum of activity.
Absolutely. The surrender spectrum acknowledges that surrender has to be adaptive. It flexes based on the pressure. Yeah. We have to recognize the 5 expressions a surrendered heart can take.
Okay, what are they?
First is contemplative stillness. That's for when clarity is clouded. When you don't know the next step, you choose quiet trust. Second, honest lament.
Giving voice to pain or disappointment.
Without self-pity, yes. Third is faithful endurance. That's the long, grinding obedience. That's Joseph serving in prison for years. Fourth is courageous obedience, taking that costly, necessary step. And finally, decisive action. Bold, strategic leadership, but it's birthed from alignment with God, not from ego or panic.
Which brings us right back to Joseph. Diligence in Potiphar's house was faithful endurance, but rationing grain in Pharaoh's court was decisive action. Same surrendered heart, just a different rhythm based on the need.
Now let's take that spectrum and that map and apply them to the situations you, our listener, will probably face this week. Let's start with the hottest crucible, conflict.
Conflict feels like the moment where the grip tightens the hardest. I mean, when you're facing opposition or unjust criticism or dealing with internal misconduct, like that Daniel example in the sources where he's facing a crisis over a trusted staff member misusing funds, the instinct is to control the narrative, hide the embarrassment, or just unleash retribution.
Right. And if Daniel had led from panic, he would have lost the center of his calling and probably alienated his entire remaining team. The sources suggest a specific surrendered conflict protocol for this. It's designed to stabilize the leader, not the outcome. You have to maintain composure. That's spiritual steadiness. Then you practice active listening and empathy, trying to understand the deeper story. And only then do you respond with decisive spirit-shaped action.
Okay, explain spirit-shaped action. Does that mean you don't fire the person?
Not necessarily. It means setting firm, necessary boundaries without bitterness. It means naming the difficult truth without cruelty. You address the violation decisively, but you don't compromise your own character in the process.
The goal is restorative justice and organizational health, not just a personal win.
Precisely.
That protocol ensures you don't surrender your integrity. But let's look at the other side of the coin. Success. The sources warn it's an even greater crucible.
It is. Because success quietly reshapes your priorities. It slowly erodes the very dependence that got you there in the first place. You start believing your own press.
And this is where we see the big difference between someone like Joseph and someone like Solomon.
Yes, Solomon was given unmatched wisdom and influence. He was a model of success. But his eventual drift, compromising his integrity for political gain, shows that triumph without ongoing conscious surrender will corrode a leader.
Whereas Joseph stewarded the blessing and stayed anchored.
He did. So success isn't a reward to claim. It's a responsibility to steward. When success hits, it requires this conscious daily reorientation of your priorities to prevent self-reliance from creeping back in.
And finally, a crucial ethical boundary here. Surrender has to coexist with responsibility and justice. It doesn't mean being passive when you see misconduct or abuse.
It cannot. The sources use that strong example of the prophet Nathan confronting King David. Nathan, facing the most powerful man of the kingdom, did not surrender his responsibility to speak truth to power. Surrender makes sure our decisive action is rooted in humility and justice, not just self-protection.
This has been a really transformative dive into the internal architecture of leadership. So, to summarize the shift, surrendered leaders don't lose control. They gain clarity, they gain integrity, and they gain stability. They move from a reactive survival mode, which is driven by fear, to proactive, faith driven stewardship.
The final charge for you, then, is to begin that difficult internal audit now. Don't wait for the next crisis to hit. Ask yourself the hard questions. What outcome or whose opinion am I currently trying to control that fundamentally isn't mine to control? Where's the fear of failure driving my decisions right now, but it's masquerading as excellence?
Just naming those roots is the first step.
It's the first step toward true freedom and leadership stability.
And as you reflect on that internal audit, consider this one final provocative thought. The world trains leaders to enforce compliance through control and hierarchy. We lead through mandates. But the sources show that surrendered leadership is contagious. It creates organizational cultures where trust and ethical consistency become normalized, not enforced. When you choose to model humility and invite participation instead of coercing outcomes, that influence just ripples outward. It transforms teams, it stabilizes families, and it builds a legacy rooted in faithfulness, not force.